Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 5th Annual Chipola Poetry Café. We're very glad you're all here. Thank you for taking time to come and enjoy poetry tonight with us. Just a word about cell phones. Go ahead and silence them now if they're not. And we'll talk more about listening to poetry a little bit later on. All these students in here that are mine, I've bored them with that before, but I want to say a word of thanks for a few people tonight. Evelyn and all of the staff here in this building always put out a nice spread for us and make us very welcome here. And so thank you to Evelyn. Hey, Evelyn. Thank you to her. She's running sound up there tonight. And everybody over here. We thank all the poets here tonight and thank them for coming and being bold enough to share their works with us, and so we couldn't do it without them. Also, I'd like to thank Rick Campbell, our speaker for tonight. More about him in just a little bit. And I also want to thank all of you. Coming out on a Thursday night to listen to poetry is not something that a lot of people do, but you're here, and so we're very glad to have you. And without all those people working together, this would just be nothing, and it is something because you're here and they're here and he's here and she's up there. And so thanks to everybody tonight for humoring me and doing this thing, okay? So here's the rundown for tonight, what you can expect. The first half or so of the program will be a poetry lecture, we call it. It's a poetry talk, whatever you'd like to call it. But Rick Campbell is going to get up and talk to us here in just a little bit, and we just kind of give him free rein to say whatever he wants to say to us about his poetry, his life, whatever, his process of writing poetry. And so that'll be the first half. After that, we will switch then to these folks over here, and we'll call them up. They're I have them kind of in categories, and so we'll call them up and let them read their poems to us, share their innermost creativity with us. And then after that, we will have a short time of question and answer. So and that's for Mr. Campbell. So as you're hearing him talk and hearing his poetry, think about questions that you might like to ask him. Could be anything about poetry. It could be something about how to write, or something about how to publish, or something about his life. Whatever it may be, you have the floor to ask your question, and he will field those questions for us. So be thinking, be thinking as we go. And then also tonight, you got a ticket when you came in, or if you didn't, we'll give you one later on. But we're going to have some drawings for some of Rick's books, and they are all autographed. So you're going to get some good stuff tonight if you have the right ticket. So we'll do that toward the end. So anyway, we're very glad to have you tonight, and really look forward to a good time together. Rick Campbell is a poet and essayist living on Alligator Point, Florida. Sounds good, doesn't it? He was describing it to me. It sounds so primitive and wonderful. His most recent book is a collection of essays, Sometimes the Light, by Main Street Rag Press. Poetry collections include Provenance, Gunshot, Peacock Dog, those go together, The History of Steel, Dixmont, Setting the World in Order, The Traveler's Companion, and A Day's Work. His poems and essays have appeared in many journals and anthologies, including the Georgia Review, Fourth River, Kestrel, Alabama Literary Review, and Prairie Schooner. He's won a Pushcart Prize and an NEA Fellowship in Poetry. He teaches in the University of Nevada, Reno's MFA program. And so we're very happy to have Rick Campbell with us. Let's all give him a big round of applause as he approaches.
Thank you. I should probably say before I forget, if you're going to be a public figure like I would be if I was really famous, you should update your bio. This is really the new book, not Sometimes the Light. Fish Streets Before Dawn. And everybody thinks it's a metaphor, but it's not. There are 9 streets on Alligator Point named for fish. sometimes your poetry teachers tell you that there's hidden meaning in everything. Sometimes a street's just a street. Or, as Freud said, what? A cigar is just a cigar. Thank you, by the way. This is a huge crowd. I haven't seen this many people at one of my poetry readings since I read in Bowling Green, Kentucky, where apparently there wasn't anything else to do on that Thursday night either, and everybody was there, you know. We have these dreams of huge audiences, and I'm skipping ahead to a later part of my life. Of course, I'll go back to my origin story where, you know, born in a hospital, stuff like that. But anyway, I was going to do this reading in Atlanta at the Jimmy Carter Center, and I was so excited because it was Jimmy Carter. It was the Jimmy Carter Center. It was a big deal. And there were a lot of more famous poets than I on the bill. And I thought they will attract people, and I will finally have an audience, you know, larger than 47, which we may probably have topped tonight. But anyway, you know, one of our many hurricanes hit, and I barely got out of Florida, and this hurricane was like coming up the left side of the car all the way. It hit Atlanta. It canceled half the reading. The streets of Atlanta were flooded. Nobody could get there. And despite all the famous poets, there were still only 39 people. So anyway, I'm glad you're all here for whatever reason you're here. I feel like this is sort of like Rick Campbell, this is your life. I can actually say anything I want to right now, right? So I'll try to adhere to some sort of guidelines. But I wanted to say, my coming to poetry story, by the way, thank you not only for coming, but I know over the years a couple of my friends have been here and done this, so I'm happy to follow them too. I never knew anything at all about poetry. I never read a poem. I never liked a poem. I got kicked out of high school for arguing with the dean about whether one should be allowed to sit in the parking lot and listen to music. He said no. I said yes. So I barely graduated from high school, although, if truth be told, I was pretty smart. I just didn't play by the rules. And then I went to the junior college, which we still had. That was before all the junior colleges changed their names. And I had no idea what poetry was or that I wanted to write it or anything like that. I didn't read a book of poetry until I was 24 and a half. I didn't write a decent poem for another year. So if this is something you're thinking about doing, you have a lot of time to work your way into it. The reason I do this is when I did go to that community college, there was a guy in the cafeteria who apparently didn't go to class either, and he was playing his guitar. Almost every day he'd be playing a guitar and singing songs, and he usually would sing something that I had heard, that I knew. I was fairly well versed in, the music of, when I graduated in 1970, so that's before the time for a lot of you, but not all of you. Some of you are old too, But anyway, I knew all the songs. I knew what songs got played. I knew, what was on the radio. I had a fairly decent music collection. So one day he plays this song that I'd never heard before, and his name was Daniel. And I said, Daniel, who wrote that song? And he said, I did. And I said, oh, no, come on, who wrote the song? He goes, I did. And it was sort of stunning. If I had been logical about it, I would have realized that somebody has to write songs. They don't just come to us like through the mail or on the radio. But I kept looking at him like, well, how'd you do that? And he goes, what do you mean, how'd I do that? I wrote a song. And I was stunned by the whole idea, to tell you the truth. Pretty naive, I guess. And I went to work that night at Morrison's cafeteria, and I wrote on the back of whatever piece of paper, I wrote the 2 sets of song lyrics. And I had no idea what to make of them, to tell you the truth. So I come back the next day, I give them to Daniel, he comes back a day or two later, and he plays my song. And I'm like, cool, that's what I want to do. I'm going to grow up to be James Taylor. And I forgot about things like not playing an instrument. And I forgot about a lot of stuff like that. And so the years go by. Daniel and I are going to go on the road and become troubadours, except for he forgot to go to class almost every day. And he failed all his classes. And I'm ready to go. And I say, well, you ready to go? And he goes, Daniel says, no, Milton says I can't go. And I said, well, why? And he says, well, because I failed my classes. I go, Daniel, you proved you can't go to college. What are you going to do? But he wouldn't go, so I had to go by myself. And about 6 years later, I decided that I would go back to college. And it would be like a real romantic end to this part of the Rick Campbell story is I'm hitchhiking down the Pan Am Highway or hitchhiking up the Pan Am Highway, or trying to get from Panama to Costa Rica. And it was a bad time to be on the highway if you were a long-haired white guy, which I was. So I got picked up by this Jeep of General Torrijos, I believe it was then. But anyway, a Jeep with a 60 caliber machine gun and 3 guys who didn't like me. And I was like, I could go to college instead of doing this. And so I came back to Florida, got a job in the city swimming pool, and the pool wasn't open. Like, things happen to people like me like that. So I get a job for 3 months. I'm working in a closed swimming pool. And the promise I made to the head lifeguard who ran the whole aquatics thing was, he goes, I'll give you a job at the pool if you quit in August and go to college. And I said, okay. So in a sense, the reason I am here before you, and I have a PhD and all that other junk, is because of this lifeguard in Riviera Beach, Florida, who thought I could probably do more than hitchhike around the country or sell suntan lotion. So there. I tried hard. When I did go to college, like I say. I went up to the University of Florida, and it was, I got there like the day Elvis died, August 16th, 1977. And I didn't know anything. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't know anything at all. It seemed like everybody was smarter and more sophisticated than I was. But I had the advantage of being 5 or 6 years older than they were, so I could bluff everything. So I just bluffed until I figured it out. But one of the things I realized that I wanted to write poetry, and for some reason I decided I didn't want to be an English major because that seemed like it would hurt. How could I be creative if they made me read Shakespeare and stuff like that? Usually I don't get invited back to if I'm talking to students about English and writing, once is enough. My friends are like, I've been trying to get them to write iambic pentameter for weeks, and then I come in and tell you guys that, well, if you're left-handed, you can only write 9 syllables before your hand smears the ink, And I'm a really good blues harp player, so I tell them that, about how long it takes to hold breath for a line. That's where I put my line breaks, and then my friends kick me out. But anyway, I went up to college, and I realized I didn't know anything at all about poetry. And I'm not kidding. The Christmas before that, my friends, I was living in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I was literally working at a grindstone factory. And there were these 4 friends. They were older and smarter than I was. And each one of them gave me this incredible book of poetry for Christmas. I don't know why. I had never read a book of poetry. I had never said I wanted a book of poetry. I never said I wanted to read poetry. But for some reason, probably realizing that I was never going to be a songwriter, they were freeing me of that burden and giving me these poetry books. And I read them, and I don't know if that's how, where you are in your education. Come on in. And, but anyway, they gave me a book by Philip Levine, a book by Richard Hugo, a book by Charles Bukowski, and a collection of like 7th or 8th century Chinese poetry. And I read all of these books, and I was stunned because it didn't sound at all like that crap they taught me in high school. I think that I shall never see a poem as lovely as a tree. I always say that line because it's really bad. It's like, it's a terrible poem, you know. But anyway, I figured like, oh, and like a naive, overconfident person, I thought, wow, I can do this. I could do what this Richard Hugo guy's doing. I could do what Philip Levine's doing. And it wasn't true, of course. I couldn't do it, not then. But it was also true that I was never going to be William Shakespeare. You know, I was never even going to be the guy that wrote I Think I Shall Never See. So what happened, I guess what I'm saying is, if you want to write poetry, you should read contemporary living poets. You should read the folks that are out there writing now, and then go backwards. You know, our historical model for education seems to always hinge like, well, let's start with Homer, or let's start with Shakespeare, or let's start with, you know, Beowulf. And I want to say no, like start with who's writing right now. Start with stuff on the web. Start with wherever you find something. And if you're interested, then work backwards to see what people did. But anyway, I wanted to be a poet eventually. I figured that out my first semester. I took some classes, but mostly what I figured out is I had to read a lot. And this might be my second instruction, if I've given a first. Read a lot of poetry. Since I'd only read 3 or 4 books before I started college, I had a lot to catch up on. So I would go to the library. Luckily back then, you know, college was, if not free, there was so much money. I had financial aid, you know, I lived in an apartment that cost $60. So, you know, I didn't have to have 3 jobs like maybe you guys do. It's a lot harder now to go to college than it was then. And so I would go to the library and I read about 20 books of poetry a week. And since I didn't know anything, it didn't matter what I read. So I would go into the contemporary poetry section. And by the way, this is true, I swear. The light bulb was never on. They had those like light bulbs that just sort of hung from the ceiling like a bad movie. But it was always off, and so I would just reach up and grab as many books as I could in one hand, and usually the other hand too. So I'd grab about 15 books, and I'd go to a chair by the window and read them. And so, like I say, I don't know what I was reading, and I had no reading agenda. I had no guidelines. I just decided I had to read all the books I could. There's a story about the novelist Tom Wolfe who wrote Look Homeward, Angel, and other things like that, books like that. And when he went to college, he sort of came straight off his rural environment. He goes to University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, and he walks into the library, and he almost has a nervous breakdown. He's like falls down on his knees, and he looks around, and people are like, what's wrong, what's wrong? And he goes, there's so many books. How am I going to read them all? And I wasn't quite that bad, but because I was only interested in poetry. So anyway, I'm trying to write poetry. And the thing I'm trying to do is I'm trying to master, let's say, the writing a metaphor. And James Wright was the poet I was reading so much at the time. And I don't know if this will make sense. It's sort of part 3 of something longer now. But this is the first time I wrote a line that I knew was really good and gave me hope, for what I was trying to do. And what I was trying to do, I was trying to write something that made sense, but I couldn't explain it. Like I just knew it was right. There's a certain kind of magic to that. And of course, if you don't think it's any good, don't tell me. But there's a line in the last part of this poem. It's in a long segment now. It was its own poem once, but now it's in a long, 7-section segment about sort of about travel. It's from this book, The Traveler's Companion. It goes like this, and it's part 3, by bus. Between cornfields and railroad tracks, inside a fence of silos, you ride through a town late at night. In the yellow of her room, a woman looks out the window at the bus. Her hips know that Erie is no moonstruck lover, just a town where half of us change for Chicago, half for New York. The line that when I said, her hips know that Erie is no moonstruck lover, like, I don't know how I did that. And that's what I was trying to do. I was trying to write something that I thought was perfect, that made sense, that fit, that worked, but I didn't know how I did it. And that's what I thought the good metaphor does, that it's something that's within language, but it's not descriptive prose. It's not telling you what a flower looks like. Although it is, in a way. I don't know what this means, right? Her hips know that Erie is no moonstruck lover. How can that be? But I thought, and I still think it's true. But when I wrote that, I thought, okay, I have a chance here. You know, I might become a poet. But like I say, I still had virtually no education. I grew up outside of Pittsburgh, little steel mill town, stuff like that. I spent the 5 years hitchhiking. So I had stories to tell, but I didn't know how to write poetry. But eventually, I guess, I learned how to write, and maybe it caught up to me, let's say that. I'm not advocating that anybody goes to college like I did, by the way. It took me 10 years to get my bachelor's degree. But 7 of those years I was hitchhiking. So I was actually pretty efficient if you count the number of days in class. And by the time I went back at age 26 and a half, I wanted to be there, so I didn't skip anymore. I was a good student after that. You would have liked me. Well, you would have liked me. I don't know about these guys. You know. Actually, my peers didn't like me at all because I was the old guy who answered all the questions, whether they knew the answers or not. So they were usually kind of pissed at me, I think. But anyway. Like I say, this is sort of a don't do as I did, do as I say type of thing. But I'm going to read, now I'm going to read a poem, and I'll start making sense maybe of things as we go along. I taught poetry at Florida A&M University in Tallahassee for a lot of years. And then I grew really tired of it because I couldn't get the students to love it and want to do it as much as I did. And so I was getting cranky. You know, they would write something about a tree, and I'd say, "What kind of tree?" They go, "I don't know, it's a tree." I go, so one night I made everybody, the building was old and hadn't been remodeled and rebuilt yet, and if the windows were closed, they wouldn't open, and if they were open, they wouldn't close. So the room we were in that night, the windows were open, so I made everybody go over and stick their head out the window. And I said, "You see a tree?" They go, "Yeah." I go, "What color is it?" They go, "What's it smell like? Can you hear the leaves?" And then I said, "Now, if you're going to write about a tree, can you incorporate some of that into your work, please?" And I realized that I had to do something else. So we hired another person to teach poetry, and I started teaching creative nonfiction or writing essays. And maybe we can talk about that later, I don't know. But anyway. But one of the things I made my students do is, you know, I'm a 98%, 90%, whatever. You know, I write free verse. I'm not a formal poet, although occasionally I will write one. But I always made my students write either a sonnet or a villanelle or a sestina because, you know, everybody should learn to write or work in form. Then you can reject it. Growing up in Pittsburgh, I wanted to be Roberto Clemente, which was a pretty tall order since he was the best player around. But his signature move was this basket catch. You know, he would run the ball down and catch it. If this was my glove, he would make a catch down here. So I'm like 9 and doing it in the outfield, and coach calls me over. Campbell, 2 hands above your head until you get to be Roberto Clemente. And so anyway, that's why you ought to probably learn to write a sonnet or a villanelle if you're in poetry class. And this is a villanelle that I'm going to read to you now. A villanelle, if you don't know, it's one of the oldest forms. It dates back to about the 12th century. French traveling troubadours and stuff used to do it. So it probably, as most early poems were, it would have been sung. But its pattern is the most famous villanelle, one that you may know, is Dylan Thomas's "Do not go gentle into that good night, rage, rage against the dying of the light." So the villanelle's pattern repeats. The first and third lines repeat through the poem, and then the poem ends with those 2 lines as a couplet, okay? So anyway, I'm just going to not talk as much as I've been talking and read this villanelle to you. Like I say, I grew up outside of Pittsburgh in a little steel mill town that if it wasn't a place you had to escape, it felt to me like a place that you had to escape from. And so the theme of this poem is trying to get away from this hometown and yet being somehow drugged back to it, like all these people that I hitchhiked with for all these years. At any given moment, you could find them either back in the valley or 3,000 miles away. You sort of never knew which one. But that's what this poem's about, and it's called Elegy. And you'll hear the villanelle pattern, I hope. Close the bus terminal, shut the train depot down, barricade all roads leading home. Too many of us come back to this town. We sit in these cheap beer bars and drown the clean and shining places we have known. Close the bus terminal, shut the train depot down. We follow road maps like dreams. We've been around. The world couldn't keep us from straggling home. Too many of us come back to this town. We live here where we were always bound. Steel towns have ways of calling home their own. Close the bus terminal, shut the train depot down. Protect us from ourselves. The siren's sound lures our swing shift blood with its one-pitched tone. Too many of us come back to this town. We are veterans returning from the road. Surround us with soot and ash, the coal barges slow moan. Close the bus terminal, shut the train depot down. Too many of us come back to this town. A friend of mine actually took this and worked backwards and he made a song out of it. And I think it's a great song, I love it. But he invited me down to the Legion Hall. He said, I'm going to play your poem that I turned into a song. So he's playing, and he has a little guitar lead, and he starts off singing, close the bus terminal, shut the train depot down. I didn't even recognize it. You know, he took the initial rhyme and he used it as a chorus, and maybe it was, you know, as the French poets used to do, I don't know. You're very solemn. I don't know what it is. Are we allowed to curse?
Sure.
Never mind. It would be gratuitous. We won't do it. Okay. I'm going to read, this one is another one about, you know, back home. Was that me? Oh, good. When I went to college in Gainesville, no one really even knew where Pittsburgh was, okay? And they certainly didn't know about steel mills, and they didn't know about the Ohio River, and they didn't know about the Beaver Valley. So for 2 or 3 years, while I wasn't maybe as good a poet as I was learning to be a good poet, let's put it that way, I was unique. I was the only one writing about Pittsburgh, the only one writing about steel mills, and it gave me a kind of mythology that might have carried the poems before they were good enough to carry themselves, I guess. But the one I want to read now is, I think I call it like an anthem or my signature poem or something like this. Like, I think it's the best poem I ever wrote about that life, about Pittsburgh, about the river, about the mill, and all that stuff. And I wrote it later in my life. I wrote it in 93 or 94. So, of course, I had left Pittsburgh. I had gotten a degree. In fact, I guess I got 2 degrees. And but I was back in Pittsburgh for a conference, and this thing came to me. I don't think I did much of this that I'm saying in this poem, which is another thing. I don't know what you think about poetry. Like, do you think poetry's true? Raise your hand. Let's have a vote. You get to decide. Democracy in action. It's not. Like, you go into a bookstore and you have the fiction section, you have the nonfiction section, right? The fiction section gets divided up into the many fictions, thriller, crime, romance, et cetera, and the nonfiction section doesn't get divided up into as many categories, but it does, health, cooking, whatever, road trips. The poetry section is just poetry. There's no true poetry or false poetry. There's no fictional poetry or non-fictional poetry. And yet, almost everybody believes that if I read this poem, it's true. Because it probably, for me, it is. I write about me. I'm only interested in me. So 90% of what I write is true, and I probably did most of it. But it isn't true of poetry in general. So there will be things that'll creep into the poem that I didn't do, and I'm going to read a poem after this one that's an example of a persona, but I totally didn't do it. But this one's called How the Streets in Front of Kaufman's Department Store Tell Me I Am Home. And a little tiny story about this has to do probably with, if you're going to send your work out, be careful. I sent this to the editor of the Georgia Review, and he liked it, and he called me up, which is rare. And he called me up and he said, I'll tell you what, I'll publish that poem if you can figure out how to spell Kaufman's. And I said, what? And he goes, well, it's in your poem 3 times, and you spelled it wrong differently 3 times. And I said, oh. And he said, so if you can figure out how to spell it, I'll publish it. So I ran back into the bedroom, into my wife's closet, because I knew she had shoeboxes from Kaufman's. So you don't always need a dictionary, So I yank out her shoeboxes, and I get the proper spelling of Kaufman's, and he publishes the poem. But again, you'll see, the reason I think of this as an anthem, or this poem sort of tells the story I've been trying to tell through many, many, many poems. For a couple years, I wrote so many poems about Pittsburgh and the river and the valley that I was forbidden to do so again. I had to go 2 weeks without mentioning Pittsburgh, the Ohio River, or a steel mill in a poem. Then I was let go. I was released, and I wrote this. Kaufman's is a huge department store in downtown Pittsburgh, and I think that if this is true, I think I did walk past it on the day that sort of this poem tends to be about. For years I have been lost. Some nights I have known it as I looked out at whatever moon hung over the wrong trees, watched as 2 bright stars glimmered in a too clear sky. Other nights, sometimes for months or years, I have thought I was home because the land I had grown familiar, because live oak and loblolly, palmetto or magnolia had begun to speak to me in a tongue I understood. I said, I live here, and the dark angels that flitted about my shoulders, tickling my ears with their doubts, fell silent in front of the beauty of azaleas, the mystery of camellias. But today I see that I have been gone these many years. 3 days after snow, little rivers of cinder water run in the gutters, ridges of plowed snow blacken where glass and steel cut off the sun. And in front of Kaufman's, in the great windows where mannequins show us what we could look like, my people, men and women wrapped in gray or brown coats, carrying plastic bags, lunchboxes, briefcases, staring straight ahead or into the past, walk the lunchtime sidewalks. We dodge each other, snow and ice and running water. I'm drawn to the deli across the street, to pastrami in Iron City, where everyone eating big sandwiches is big and thick, and their voices sing Pittsburgh when they say iron. On the street again in the dark canyon of Grant Street, I head for the river and Mount Washington rising on its far shore. My eyes climb the tracks on the incline, its red car inching skyward like a bucket of coal winched up a cliff. The Monongahela is running high and fast, spring snow runoff carrying trees, beds, chairs, and trash toward the Ohio, and I know I am home, because from here on this bridge, I can see the Allegheny's muddy mountain water merge with this gray to birth the Ohio. No headwaters, no springs rising in a quiet swamp of cattails. The Ohio roars full bore past Neville Island's abandoned steel plants, past the silence of American Bridge, past the gravel slab that was once Jones and Laughlin, past my bedroom window that once saw the fire, the smoke and ash of 3 shifts a day, whole valleys working, living mill lives. From here, because I know that I am home, I can see 25 miles downriver as it bends at Beaver and runs west to East Liverpool, where my grandfather bought his shoes and worked his first job, and then turned south for Martin's Ferry, James Wright and Wheeling. I am home today, all of us, standing in front of Kaufman's windows, waiting for the light to change, together at last. Maybe you have to go to Pittsburgh. You know? Thank you. I'm not going to read the persona one, it's a little bit long, but this is the next poem in the book, and I think I'm going to read it. It's for my daughter. We tried a long time to have a child, and as happens sometimes, my daughter was born 3 years after my mother died. So, for us, like a great tragedy of life was the fact that my mother never saw my daughter. And when this poem is actually written probably at the same, the inspiration for it or whatever, was written on that same trip to Pittsburgh. And I suppose my wife was 7 or 8 months pregnant, so I'm thinking about being a father in what was a relatively old age to be a father. I mean, you can tell I'm like 41 now, but that's all right. It's been kind of slow in here. So anyway, I wrote this poem thinking about my daughter being born, thinking about my mother being gone, and it's sort of a bridge between my past and her future. So it's called 1,000 Miles from Della Rose. She was, we were living outside of Tallahassee, so that's an approximate distance. How's that? When little I remember survives, this life will at last be mine. As I stand in the valley, I know now I have to tell you of our loss. Your grandmother, the rose of your name, is gone. This valley that made me has gone to another life. The dark, cold mills singing of our lost gods and their slaughter block of dreams line the river like pallbearers. You'll think I made too much of this, and I'll tell you all too often of things you'll never see. Forge, foundry, furnace, the black smoke and slag. Your land is loblolly and magnolia. No coal barges crawl through your dreams. We trade steel for flowers. You are my new river. Process. It was one of the things Dr. McGinnis said. My process is kind of odd. I sit and if I'm not disciplined, okay? Don't be like me again. I sit and if I'm going to write poetry, almost all the time I have to read it first. So if I get up early in the morning, which I usually do, maybe I'll read some poems, and I read until something strikes me, something sort of inspires me, I guess would be the right word. And I put the book and the poem down, and I write. And usually I'm lucky enough to write a whole poem in one setting. Okay, I don't work on stanza by stanza lines. You know, I write a whole poem. It might not be any good, or it might get good later, but it's done. When I get to the last line, the poem is done. And then for months or however long, you know, I'll revise it. I'll try to make it better. But I don't write in segments. And I also don't have an idea before I start what I'm going to write. I don't plan to write a poem about Alligator Point. I don't plan to write a poem about dolphins. That's my primary fun now. Is, you know, I walk on the beach at sunrise every day, and if there are dolphins doing their flipper thing, or dolphins chasing mullet up on the beach, it's a good day. If you know, if a 600-pound dolphin comes within 3 feet of you and then sprays water on you, that's like cool, you know. The steel mills are way gone after that. But my process is totally, it's almost automatic writing. Automatic writing is something that Ginsberg and a lot of poets of the 60s, you know, they sort of claimed they could just, maybe they were on drugs, maybe they weren't, but they could claim that they could kind of channel things, and, you know, poems would spew out of them. And a teacher I had, Richard Eberhardt, he said that Ginsberg and those guys called it first word, best word, which is a really dangerous thing to tell students. No, it is not true. You know, you're going to revise for a long time. You know, hardly anybody's ready to do the first word, best word thing. And neither was Ginsberg, by the way. He could have used an editor a lot of times, you know. I mean, anybody, did you ever read How? Didn't you wish it was shorter? You know? But then I thought that about the Odyssey, too, so, you know. Anyway, I revise a lot. I get in trouble for saying, like, oh, I write a poem all at once, and then you guys go away and think that's the way it gets done. But I also have a poem that I'm not going to read to you tonight, that I wrote it for 16 years. You know, I was in Gainesville, and my mother, I guess my mother was still alive. My mother wrote me a letter and told me about this, one of my junior high school friends' fathers got murdered. And we never even had a crime in Baden. You know, we only had 2 cops, but we only had 1 car. So, you know, if the cop car went downriver, then you went upriver. And it took them a half hour to get back to your end of town. But we didn't do anything wrong, you know. And so suddenly my friend's father's murdered. And, you know, so I had to think about that. And then sometime after that, I read in the news that the guy that murdered my friend's father was caught in Florida after he had broken into somebody's house, and I'm not sure he killed them. Let's not get too gross about things. But the point was, you know, wow. And so I kept trying to write this long narrative about, you know, a kind of both coming-of-age story and sort of writing to this friend, John, who I had never seen again. I never saw him after his father was murdered. So the poem kind of went through that long stage of things. And I'm not sure why I'm telling you that. So how am I fixed for time? One more? Yeah. Okay. Nobody ever tells you no. Oh, sure, read one more. So anyway, I should read one from the new book, since it's new. This Fish Streets Before Dawn is from a press, it's called Press 53 up in North Carolina. And they do really good work, and they deserve my trying to sell a few books, because if you run a small press, you do not make money, okay? And if you publish poetry, you do not make money. Amazon makes money. If you buy from Amazon, by the way, Amazon gets 55% of the cover price. And the press has to pay the postage, which means out of a $17 book, the press gets about 4. I still get my 98 cents at the end of the year, but, Which is why if you all buy books tonight, then I'll have enough gas to drive all the way home. So one poem from this new book. I had a Volkswagen bus back in the day, and it didn't run very well. It had a bad solenoid. And so if it wouldn't start, you had to go under the bus with a screwdriver and jump the terminals of the solenoid, which probably can't be done anymore, thank goodness. But the story that precedes the poem is, I was going over to have a first date with this woman, and I was living in this Volkswagen bus, and her mother did not appreciate that at all when I pulled up in their front yard. And probably I should have put her shirt on. That might have helped too. So anyway, I get out, and I've got long blonde hair, no shirt. I open the doors to the bus, and it's obvious that I'm living in it. And for some reason, this woman's mother let her get in the car. I don't know why. But it wouldn't start. So I get out, and I say, Mrs. Doucette, I'm sorry, I'm having trouble with this car. So I roll under the back of the solenoid is backed by the rear tire. There's 2 things you have to know about this, in a 4-speed. Do not have it in gear when you jump the solenoid, because it's going to jump too. So, you take it out of gear about 4 or 5 times, and then you get under the car, and you reach up with your screwdriver, and the moment you think it's going to touch the 2 screws on the solenoid, you roll out up from under the bus really quite fast, because you're not positive you took it out of gear. And then if it works, you get up and clean yourself off and hope that girl's mother will let you go out with her again. She didn't, so we got married. That didn't work either, by the way. But remember, I'm not telling you how to live or write poetry. So anyway, this will be my last poem, and then everybody will join up. Jumping the Volkswagen bus. It works like this. Take it out of gear. Turn the key on. Get your screwdriver from under the seat. Walk back to the right rear tire. Are you sure it's out of gear? Reach up. Lay the blade across the solenoid terminals. Having little faith in prayer, start rolling from under the bus. Let your breath out as the damn thing starts and does not crush your skull. Smile if someone is watching. Be cool as you dust the sand off your arms and legs. Climb back into the front seat. Don't stall the car when you shift into first. Thank you. Always close on a high note.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Rick, for that. That was a very interesting and entertaining and helpful, I think. And we appreciate you being here. Well, tonight, as we carry on, a word about listening to poetry. You've done very well, by the way, so I really don't feel like I have to educate you on this. But poetry is by definition, usually by definition, compact and expansive, so packed with meaning in a very small place. And so it's kind of like these little towns we live in around here. If you blink your eyes, you may miss the whole thing. And so tonight, I say, sit on the edge of your seat a little bit. Hold your breath. Listen very carefully to what's being said, because you don't want to blink and miss anything. All right. All right, so I have some kind of categories of poets that are about to come up. The first 2 are Sean O. Smith and James Guest. These guys are both part of Grassroots Poetry Society, which I should plug a little bit. This is a poetry society that we have here in the Mariana area, and we have meetings. We put out a publication every so often, and the guy that's about to come up, you can come on up, Sean O. Smith is my partner in that, and if you are interested in grassroots, I'm going to direct you to him afterwards tonight. So if you would like to talk about that, he's the man to talk to, and he'll be glad to steer you in the right direction. But Sean, come on up and share with us. And then after him will be James Guest.
Sean, give me a moment to get out of your way. Sure. I feel like I'm being stared here. No?
I can stare at you while I perform. Should I face the all?
Okay. I think over the corner.
Oh. Oh. Oh, you. Oh, you. Oh, you. Oh. Oh, you. Oh. Oh, yo. Oh, yo. Oh, you leapo. Oh? Oh, you up. Oh, you up. The carpenter encourages the goldsmith. Thank you.
When I think about what poetry means to me, I simply remind myself that it is the language of life, our memories and emotions. I do sometimes wonder if our words build up our experiences to be more profound than they really are, or perhaps they only just begin to express the depth of how we feel. For me, the love poem has been my main practice of expressing my emotions. It has been such a practice throughout the ages because it is such a force. And I'd like to challenge anybody who's listening to me that if you do have doubts about that force in your own life, to make room for it. Here are two original love poems. The first one has a simple title, Passion. Here is a dream imparted unto us, bordering upon the wakeful shore, taking and giving, water's thievery, compromise in the hallowed courts. Stalling upon the dappled path, a litter for a royal or newly wedded bride. The finest sugar pours forth from the doors, the most flavorful pepper. It is ecstatic bounding as the storm draws near, mobility ensured to a life that has all but nurtured motion, an oil for anointment and a buffer to the waves, mangroves cushioning the sea, an untold psalm of which praises ring hymeneal, a gracious calm, soft and subsiding, trailing from a blaze. Along the fray, where there are displaced seeds of the divine, deft is his art, ivory and pastels woven into the brocade. This grip is disarming. It has become our sole confessor, and possessing idle hands, a disservice to ourselves. A murmur from the lips of a shell, the petals of an iris, swells as white horses crush falling pearls. There is blonde smoke rising, gases shepherding the embers, buoyancy superseding gravity. This passion is exemplary of what is fair. It has become a touchstone for desire. We have been blessed with a host of gifts, my fountain of youth, my city of gold, rapture and resolve, divine grace, the kindling and the aloe leaves. We are splitting sensations which transcend matter, oaring us to another sphere. This next poem has been written in 2 languages. Tráeme tus preocupaciones y también admite cualquier error que hayas cometido en paz conmigo. Permíteme ser el seguro de tu preocupación, un establo para tus caballos cansados. Siempre puede abrotar mi cielo con tu inquietud y tus deseos insatisfechos. Si eso te ayuda a relajarte lo suficiente como para dormir un poco por la noche. Bring your cares to me and admit any wrongs you have made in peace with me as well. Allow me to be the failsafe to your worry, a stable for your tired horses. You may crowd my sky always with your restlessness and your unmet desires, if it helps you to relax enough to get some sleep at night.
Thank you, guys. The next group is a little bit larger, and these are either present students or former students of mine, and so I'm going to call your names out, and this is the order you go in, so just remember this. Ariana Baxter, Abigail Harris, Madeline Barber, Rebecca Barnes, Charlotte Franklin, Craig Johnson, Zachary Kilby. Is Zachary here? He's playing baseball right now, so he might come over in a minute. Oh, and by the way, there is a baseball celebration with fireworks tonight, and so if you start hearing fireworks, it's not part of the program, and it's not a gun. It's that. So anyway, they did that for us. And then lastly, Ian Salas in that group. So I'll let those guys come up in that order. Ariana?
I'm reading off my phone, don't mind me. Okay. Liking you is like honey dripping from a spoon. It's sweet and slow and doesn't let go. Liking you is like the sunset. It's beautiful and new every day and makes you appreciate things just a little bit more. Liking you is like learning to ride a bike for the first time. It's scary and exciting and a little bit crazy. Liking you is learning that it's actually love that I feel. Love that has been here for almost a decade. Love that I've felt since the 7th grade. Love that I may never be reciprocated. Love that is as sweet and slow as honey dripping from a spoon. Yay.
So I have a couple poems here. 3 of them are haikus, so they ain't gonna take long. So the thing about these, the haikus, I actually wrote them like 4 years ago, I believe. My first time I went to college at UWF, which I dropped out of, unfortunately. I did not like poetry. I wrote it for a creative writing class. I am an artist. I am not a poet. But the thing about these, I was in a not great place when I was writing them. I was very depressed. It's why I dropped out eventually. I ended up losing like an entire fully paid scholarship and everything. And the next poem I wrote about 2 weeks ago for an assignment. I am in a much better place now. And you'll probably be able to tell very quickly by listening to them the difference. So the haikus, the 3 of them. And the first one. I sit on my bed, peacefully reading a book. I need exercise. Awaiting nighttime, I look up to see the stars. The ceiling greets me. And as my eyelids close, ending a productive day, it is 4 a.m. So those are the 3 that I wrote when I was very depressed in college. If you couldn't have noticed by their tone. Now this one is a narrative poem that I wrote. As I mentioned, I am an artist. I have been working every year. It's like an annual event. I try to make a webcomic, and then I realize it's too much work and stop making it and then start it again the next year. So I'm currently working on it for my annual attempt this year. This is a depiction of 2 of my characters. I'd claimed her much too smart for greater good, claimed tryhards never last up there alone, then told her that nobody understood, told friends won't stay themselves aside your throne. Despite the noblesse she wielded with grace, her status was one no other came near. Decried she's flown too far above her place, I'd thought she'd fall far below all her peers. She looked at me and asked, am I to blame? Mused, yes, I am undeserving in ways. Still, they enjoy using me and my name, and then they'll accuse me, just as you say. She seemed squarely set, stood upon her ground, and I, below, in my dirt, rolled around.
So I have 2 poems, and the first one I wrote in like 4th grade, so forgive me. It was like the first poem I ever wrote, and I had to write it for school. And my mom read it like a couple months ago. I don't know why, but she did, and it made her cry for some reason. So here we go. We are little icicles melting in the sun, see our little teardrops falling one by one, and my mom said that they were dying and they were crying about their deaths. So that's not my intent in 4th grade, but that's what she read into it. And the second one I wrote Monday night after I signed up for this and realized I didn't have any good poems. And so here this is. In this cage there are 2 birds, they both have been done wrong. The first is skittish, snippish, shy, she'd sell you for a song. The second is the braver one, the better of the 2. He's content with his melody, though his voice is out of tune. The first could sing for all the world, and still she'd be not free. The second's happy in our cage, and so he sings for me. Thank you.
Hi. I don't write poems either, but I write music, and so I get ideas and then I write about it, and so this is what this originally was. I think about it every night, the way your fragile hand fit into mine. We consequently ran out of time together. Will we ever be all right? Watched you walk away again and again, things will never be the same. You came back to life, shined your brightest light. I thought we were forever, turns out we were just together. I couldn't move on from you, I was always so blue. It might always just be me, but we were never meant to be.
Good evening. My name's Charlotte. I've been a poet since I was about 13. So I'm doing a poem. I think I wrote this poem a while ago for another poetry event. And it's just speaking to people's inner child. What's in you must come forth. Every gift, every talent, every voice, every spirit, every person, every being. God's children are ordained to breathe from the dust to the dirt where we're alive. Did our inner child survive? I envy every child in the crowd. I wish I could be myself out loud. What's in me must come forth. My inner child that played in the sand, turned my adventures to the Saudi Arabian land. Me and my buddies, the backyardigans, we were back in the yard again. I missed the little girl that sang so loud. She didn't mind being the odd one out of the crowd. What's in you must come forth. Don't be afraid to be the dork. Miss Unpopular for her interests in realism and science. Mr. Uncool for his interests are in feeling and social defiance. I envy every child in the crowd, for the simplest things make their parents proud. A finger painting is Picasso, and a vocab word like confidence is profound. Doing cute things is a momentous occasion worth picturesque, and being potty trained is trophy worthy. Not being pissed off at your school buddies for stealing your fake girlfriend is a sign of growth, and becoming conscious of thoughts and feelings becomes a flowing fountain of dreams, imagination that has to remain in the upcoming generation. For without a dream, a man shall perish, and we already have those men leading our nation. No longer childlike in God's creation, that inner child is spiritually foundation. What is in you must come forth. I no longer envy every child in the crowd. I just encourage you to live now. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Hello. This is a poem I wrote. Hope you enjoy it. It's called No Yes. Another morning, woken to duress, birds scream, squirrels chitter, clean and glittered beams. I cannot say no, I cannot say yes. My mind empties of fleeting, fleeing dreams. I rise, I clean, in the same clothes I dress. Today and day and day my time I bide. I cannot say no, I cannot say yes. This hole that never fills, I feel inside. Come clean, come dirty, we were all a mess. Meander in our loves for one and all. You cannot say no, you cannot say yes. If words and works you seek, come hear our call. 12 steps we have, and walk them we have some. That urge we know will help you overcome. Thank you.
Zachary, not here yet? Okay, maybe he'll come in. Ian?
Hey everyone. This one is actually written based off two of my most favorite fictional characters. I thought, why not give them some justice a little bit? Oh, sorry, I'm a little quiet. So this one's called Something Borrowed, Something New. A hero once full of hope and life, now a symbol of vengeance and strife. A cathedral stands erect in the rain, crouched down at the altar a man in pain. The bell tower serves as the hero's perch, another gargoyle among the church. The man seeks pre-forgiveness, washed anew. He pleads with God all alone in the pew. Both men are shrouded in sorrow, rage, and blame, and both men place the blame on the hero's name. The hero looks to his hands in his pitch-black suit, once colorful and heroic, now a dark brute. Clenching his fist, he drops down to the bell. It's time to send this demon back to hell. Hearing his thoughts, this suit, black as sin, refuses to leave. It grips his skin. The bell rings as the hero struggles to set himself free. The man hears the chimes and screams and leaves the sanctuary. He looks up and finds the hero, his foe, as the inky shadows fall down below. The pained hero tears away piece by piece. The bell's chimes and his screams go without cease. The man is horrified as darkness descends upon him. Black tendrils wrap around his body, head, torso, and limb. Our hero collapses after shedding his black sinew. The man collapses as one become two. Venom a brew, unholy matrimony, something borrowed, something new. The second one I have was one I just felt needs to be said nowadays especially, and it really just reflects my faith. This one's called The Time Is Now. Society crumbles, this world's a cage. No civility, just public outrage. Here division reigns and relations torn. Scorn is placed on the good and unborn. The children we no longer protect but confuse, the government and media causing a ruse. Where are the righteous in this perverse generation? Why have we allowed evil to bring reformation? Growing worse by day and night, right is wrong and wrong is right. What is a father to do? Who can he trust when the snakes feed children their venom and dust? Worry not, brothers and sisters, for Christ shall return. The old will be made new, and all that's evil will burn. But until that great day comes, we have a calling to walk with Christ and spread his word, so stop stalling. Thank you.
All right, so our final group of poets are all teachers. And so we'll begin with Miss Carol Schimpf, who is an English teacher at Chipley High School. And so after her will be Mr. Lynn Wallace, who actually was our speaker 2 years ago. And so he's here with us again tonight, and he's going to come and share. And then my good friend, Dr. Mark Ebel, who teaches Spanish and Hispanic cinema here at Chipola College. And then I'm going to bring up the rear. So we'll go in that order.
I wasn't sure what the lighting would be like, so I brought both my books and the typed copies, because I'm not sure which one I'm going to need, because old people are half blind, and I forgot my reading glasses, so you'll have to forgive me. Dr. McInnes said that this was a safe space, so I hope that that is true. So we'll have a go at it. I have two selections that I want to read tonight, and they're very different from each other. The first poem is entitled, Still Aching. Thrust the dagger of malice. Jerk it roughly from my unsuspecting flesh. See if you've drawn blood. Is there enough pain for you yet? Thrust again into my shocked flesh. Withdraw the dagger carefully. See the blood drip from the blade. Is there enough gore for you yet? Thrust once more with brutal intent. Twist and turn the blade to reach the vital spot. Is there enough satisfaction for you yet? Seize the opportunity when I turn away. Jab at my vulnerable back. Anywhere will suffice for your pleasure. Ah, glory in your smug self-righteousness. As I stumble from your gashes so maliciously delivered, do you believe I will ever forget the giver of my unsolicited pain? Look now upon this emptied face, vacant stare perfected for you. A new role I assume, my features give no clue. But the time will come when you turn away, and a stronger me will be 2 steps behind, my scarred back still aching. This second poem was written for the man who is now my husband. It is a love poem, so it's very different than the last one. And it is entitled, and I'm going to look and see which one is better for me to read. My handwriting is terrible. This one's better. Okay. It's entitled, Tailor of My Heart. Tailor of my heart, please be gentle with your stitches. I feel each one intensely in the raw edges of my love. I wear my sadness like a color, visible from the inside out. You see my hue in the distance, an unfamiliar brightness. I see your own sadness from the outside in, and you cannot hide your confusion, clearly cloudy but with sincerity. Randomness becomes more predictable, the pattern I begin to see, but no cuts or pins to make it fit. Let the pattern mold as it will, to cover the lonely emptiness, to cloak the agonizing uncertainty, to heal the sharp hurt, to warm the numb heart, to increase the urgent need, to shock from the stupor of the agonizing void. Patterns never fit exactly, a perfect fit one way, but gaping imperfections elsewhere. My tailor says no alterations. Inconsistencies will not matter. Let come whatever will. The pattern loosely flows. Oh, what have you done, tailor of my heart? What was once my pattern now fits you. And I stand before you, my garment transparent and seamless, trembling from your fierce gaze, stripped of all pretense, my constant love naked still, my open heart its secrets confessing. Thank you.
Thank you. Nice to be here tonight. And thank you, Mr. Campbell. One thing that happened as I was listening to your poetry is poetry of place. And if we were doing a workshop tonight, I guarantee you each of you could write a poem about place, where you grew up, where you lived. I'd simply ask you 5 things that you saw in that place when you were young, 5, maybe 3 things that you heard, 2 things that you touched with your hands, maybe 1 thing that you smelled or tasted. And you'd each leave with a place poem. It's a guaranteed successful poem for all of you. Try your hand at it sometime. But anyway, listening to the poem about Pittsburgh, the poems about Pittsburgh, made me think of a poem I wrote about place. It's on Old Woman Mountain, Kodiak, Alaska. After all morning climbing, I stop on top of Old Woman Mountain, maybe on her flattened breast, maybe her hip bone, from down there where I started. I jam my hiking staff through snow crust. On the bay, a Coast Guard cutter glides among broken flats of ice. A stake truck inches along the road. The sun glints off unbroken snow to my right. Devil's Prong peaks, streaked vertically with white, drain blue from the sky south. I shift weight, snow crunching under boot. My breath ices my nostrils this first day without wind. I remove gloves, shove them under my armpit, lean against this staff, feeling the cool, pale wood in my hand. I'll go down soon. The cutter sounds its air horn in the harbor. And then I've been working in fiction mostly lately. So I feel like this is cheating because all my poetic leanings are kind of prosy and all my prose is a little bit poetic. And yet I think there's a lot of prose poetry out there. And I think of Kenneth Pachin, other poets that do that. They almost write from margin to margin. You say, hey, that looks like prose, but in fact it's poetry because it's got the concision and tightness of poetry, maybe the sound play too. So I wrote this and posted it. Maybe this was a mistake. I posted it on Facebook, Instagram, whatever those interbreeding social media are. And my sister wrote and said, did you write this? And she sounded surprised. And I said, well, you don't notice a citation there that I got it from someplace. So yes, I did write it. She wrote back, oh. So anyway, this is called An Old-Fashioned Tale, the story of a boy and an anthill. There was a boy in a village. On most days, his mother busied herself with household chores. He collected water and kindling wood, and his father made ready to head out to labor in the fields. When the boy finished his duties, he knelt near an anthill a short distance from his home. He plunged a stick into the anthill and stirred. He then backed away and watched the chaos and mayhem. He did this most days. One day when the boy was about 10, his father stopped to watch his son. The boy saw his father standing there, and he quickly stopped what he was doing. The father waved the boy farther back from the fury of the ants. Then he knelt next to the boy. I've been waiting for the right time to tell you this, his father began. See those hills? He said calmly to the boy, pointing to the brown hills behind them. One day a horde of savage men may swarm over those hills. They will steal what they can and burn the rest. They will kill as many of us as they are able. The father looked at the boy. I want you to promise me that if you see this, you will run away as fast as you can. Don't look back. Run far into the woods, hide there until it is over. The boy's eyes were wide with wonder and fear. But why would men do this? The father stood. Ah, good. Then you have heard those ants. He patted his son on the head and strode off to the fields.
Good evening. Last year at this event, I read a poem called On the Way to San Jose. My son had recently moved to California. I had made the mistake of taking him as a teenager to visit my sister who lives in Huntington Beach. And there he experienced real waves. He's a surfer. not like the puny little waves we have in Panama City Beach. So his lifelong dream was to move to California. Ended up in Santa Cruz, which is one of two places that claim to be the surfing capital of the world, or of the United States at least, continental United States. And on the flight there, I was inspired by a safety talk by the flight attendant. And in the process of explaining the safety regulations, she said, "We love you, but we don't trust you." And that kind of struck a chord with me. And I took out my iPhone and started typing a poem that dealt with the issue of trust. Well, I was high at the time, about 30,000 feet. And I didn't have that same inspiration this year because my son, in order to cope with the cost of living in California, has taken on a second job. So I really couldn't visit him because he was working all the time. So during spring break again this year, I tried to think of what can I use as an inspiration for a poem for this year's reading. And finally it came to me, Complete Strangers. And that came about because I drive a 1973 Ford Bronco. And I can't go anywhere with that truck without somebody coming up to me and asking first, what year is it? And then coming up with the line, "They sure don't make them like they used to." I hear this from maybe 6 out of 10 people that come to admire the truck. Well, I thought that's going to be my title, but then I realized, well, that applies to really more than just old vehicles. The old Bronco, the classic old Bronco, was started by Ford in 1966, and they made them through 1977. And in that year, 1977, Ford decided to take on other priorities. So people that see this vehicle, they reflect back in time, I guess, to an earlier time when things were different. So this is the title of my poem today. Grandpa drove an old Ford Bronco for more than 30 years. Academic papers used to be evaluated by a committee of peers. The World News Tonight is an unworthy substitute for Walter Cronkite. Dr. King said not to judge someone by the color of their skin. Today his words ring all too thin. The Pope warned that communism is one of 3 imminent threats. Basketball coaches still focus on cutting down the nets. The former president said that we had nothing to fear. Politicians continue to practice extreme measures to smear. When making travel reservations to foreign lands, consult the State Department list of travel bans. Economic promises have been made but not met. Classified documents appeared alongside a '67 Corvette. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate everyone reading. I'm going to read a couple of poems to you tonight. I've taken on what is, for me, a pretty ambitious goal, and that is to write 20 poems that I'm calling a blank verse sonnet cycle. It's based on some verses out of Proverbs in the book of in the Bible, the book of Proverbs, and chapter 30, in which over and over it says there are 3 things, something, something, for that blah, blah, blah. Okay. And so this sonnet cycle is going to be called 3-4. And in this passage from the Bible, there are things like, things that are never satisfied, like the grave and the earth that is not filled with water, and things that are too wonderful, things that disquiet the earth, things that are little but wise, like ants, and then things that go well, like kings and lions and things. So I'm going to read a couple that I've actually finished. As I said, this is very ambitious for me. I've written 2 of them. There are 20. I have to write 20. All right. So I've written 2, and then part of a third. The first one I'm going to read is something that is too wonderful, one of the 2 wonderful things, and it's an eagle in the air. So I raised my hand when Rick asked if poetry was true, because I really do think that good poetry is true. But I started thinking about this poem. I took my inspiration from this red-tailed hawk that I see about every day sitting on a power line along 231 as I'm going back home to Dothan. And so it's a hawk, but I'm going to call it an eagle. So, true. Here we go. Oh, and it's a sonnet, and it's blank verse, so that means it doesn't rhyme, but it's got the, but-um of iambic meter. Alighting mid the length of power line, exactly in the center, freezing firm, she casts her gaze on plains where mice cavort neath heaps of peanut bushes, turned to thresh. And then the eagle spies her tiny prey. The faintest whisper breeze reveals his sand-browned coat and black eye, ignorant of fate. Not you nor I could spot a move at all. We'd marvel at the stillness of the land, oblivious to motion, lulled into the dream that stasis is the natural state. Then all at once, her wings unfurl and beat the static air as she begins her dive. To have her sight, her flight would wondrous be. So that's one of them. Thank you. Thank you. All right, so this one is one of the things that disquiets the earth, all right? And the thing is an odious woman when she is married, all right? Oh, she was odious right from the start, no doubt, yet masked her odium neath layers of toothy smiles and winks and twinkling eyes. He did not glimpse what lay below her shell of outer splendor. Earth itself became disquieted when, in her bright veneer, she drew him to the altar and to grief. And now he cannot change his mind, except with more expense and grief. And so he sucks in breath and frowns and bites his tongue and sighs because he's stuck, attempting to restrain the wind and grasp the oil with his right hand. And meanwhile, she, like rainfall pouring o'er a glutted gutter, drips and drips and drips. Thank you. All right, so before we have our question answer time, I think we'll go ahead and do our drawing. Are y'all ready to get a prize? Yeah. So these are books from Rick Campbell that are signed by the author. This one, he told me, is a first edition. So I'm thinking about just keeping this one and retiring. That's what he told me I could do, but anyway. So Courtney, where are you? Okay, can you bring that? But did you have some thoughts that you want to ask about? Anybody? Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned your 2 favorite poems were the one about Pittsburgh and about your own daughter. And your question was how basically real are most poems type thing. I was wondering what percentage of the poems that you write deal with realism as opposed to other options.
Okay, I'm going to re-ask that question because we're recording and I want to make sure we can hear it. Could you hear that, Harrison, or not?
Probably not.
Okay, so what percentage of his poems are realistic versus non-realistic?
Right.
Okay, and
His 2 favorite poems he read were
because his 2 favorite poems that he read were realistic. So I'll let him answer that question.
most of the poems I write are about me. They're all realistic. There's a difference between real and realistic, and there's also a difference between true and realistic. So in those two poems, the one that I addressed to my daughter, it's probably 99% true. I don't change any names to protect the innocent or anything like that. But in the one about Kaufman's department store, I didn't make anything up. The Ohio River, when it floods, is going to look like that. There's going to be a bunch of trash rolling under the bridge. Kaufman's window does look, it's full of mannequins. But I was there in March, and I was kind of describing maybe a Kaufman window from Christmas. I didn't hear anybody eat a pastrami sandwich and say iron. It's really terrible beer. Nobody should drink it. So, but there's nothing untrue in the poem. I believe that, I write about myself, and I sometimes have to embellish myself. And sometimes I write in a persona, where I'm not myself at all. But those are rare for me. And those two poems, they're both love poems. One's a love poem for my daughter. The other's a love poem, for the river and the valley where I grew up. So they're true. But I'm not, sometimes you have to change something, wouldn't you rather have an eagle in your poem than a hawk, Maybe the fish I catch is bigger than it really was. I don't know. But I don't lie very much. How's that?
Yeah. That's good. All right, thank you. Yeah. All right. Anyone else have a question? Okay, I'm sorry. Yes.
You mentioned Philip Levine, I heard James Wright in there, both favorite poets of mine too. Who is your favorite personal poet, or do you have many?
All right. The question is, who is your favorite poet or poets? Yeah, other than yourself, yeah. Goes without saying.
I am not my favorite poet. I do have many, but I keep going back to the three, the Levine and Wright and Hugo, along with Bukowski. But Bukowski has faded a bit for me, although I think he's very good. But Philip Levine was my favorite, and still is my favorite for a couple reasons. One, because of the working class environment. He grew up, grew up in Detroit, and he wrote about the mills in Detroit. Here's the thing about true. I never worked in a steel mill. My father didn't work in a steel mill. My father worked in the post office. But when I write these poems, I write about our fathers who work in the mill, because the post office is boring. And I'm creating mythology when I write about the Pittsburgh and the mill story and all that. So a lot of that is true because the mill is there and all my neighbors work there and, they work three shifts a day and all that stuff. But not me, in fact, Bruce Springsteen said, that he's a total fraud because he didn't work in a factory like he wrote about. He didn't have a driver's license when when the band went on the road. He said, yeah, me who writes about all these hot cars and overhead cam 6s and strap your hands to my engines. He didn't have a driver's license and he didn't know how to drive, And he said, I never had a job. I just got this guitar. And as the song says, I learned how to play, But so I create a lot of my personal mythology. But again, I don't think I have ever lied, if that makes any sense. Levine I got to meet Philip Levine a lot, and I got to write to him, and there's a special collection of Levine work in the library in New York, and it's like absolutely inconsequential, but my little postcards to Philip Levine are in that library. So when you're doing research on Philip Levine, there'll be little postcards he wrote to me, Yes, ma'am. Pardon me?
It's interesting that a post office could be considered a boring place. I'm from Las Vegas, and I grew up with lots of action around me. most interesting places because of the way people talk and
Right.
walk and the way they, present themselves or don't,
Right.
So it could be a pretty good poem.
Yeah. Well, I was lying. I love the post office, but I go there all the time. But I didn't like my father, so I didn't write about my father in the post office. I wrote about Mr. Cordes, who worked 3 shifts at Jones and Laughlin.
Oh, yes, sir.
Who does your publishing?
I'm one of those poets who has 8 or 9 books from 8 or 9 publishers. And it's not it's the fate of many poets, I think, in the country. We don't sell many books. It costs some money to publish a book, and the publishers either do or don't stay in business. For 20 years, I ran a small press, and they just don't make any money. So I know I don't have 2 books from the same publisher. The newest one is from, like I said, Press 53, and the one before that was a California press, and the prose book is another North Carolina press. And so anyway, nobody has published me that you've heard of, and hardly anybody. Most American poets, they don't really get hooked into a big house because the big houses don't publish poetry anymore either, so they're a little bit nomadic. I'm very nomadic. If you Google me online, you get the stock car racer and the guy that writes about submarine adventure stories. I come up like 5th. Anybody else?
Yeah, down here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I know it's a bit of an obvious question, but why do you think so many people dislike poetry?
That's a good question. 2 things. One is,
Would you repeat that?
oh, he wanted to know why it seems that so many people dislike poetry. I don't know how many people dislike poetry. I know that only 7% of the American population, reads what's considered a literary book. So a much smaller percentage of the population reads poetry. And I'm not sure you can dislike it if you don't read it. Like it's, I don't know. When I ask, what poets have you read? What book of poetry? Nobody reads a book of poetry. You read a couple poems in an anthology in high school, and then you sit around and somebody makes you talk about whose horse is this? I think I know his house lives in the village, though, and you go, oh, who cares? So I think we are taught really poorly, about poetry, and we're taught that, it's tough and it's difficult and it has secret meanings, and then you get a quiz. Jeez, give me a break, So, but if in high school or wherever, people read live poetry by live poets, and if, performance poets, and people came in and did things, but they don't, because the anthologies that you're forced to teach out of, most of the poets, even the contemporary ones, are dead. So it's really hard to get a sense of, maybe you guys didn't like this. I'm not trying to get complimented. But every time I go to a school and I read, most people have not been to a poetry reading before, and a lot of them say they'll go to another one. And I'm not trying to be Johnny Appleseed or anything, but I think people dislike poetry because it was forced upon them in an atmosphere that wasn't conducive to enjoyment. I don't like algebra. What about you? But nobody runs around bad-mouthing algebra. God, I hate algebra. I hope I don't have to end the name. Damn algebra today. X squared. I don't fucking care about X. No, go ahead. I swallowed that word. Yes.
You mentioned that you started doing essays and that sort of thing. What makes you kind of want to transition into that, and has it changed your poetry any?
Yeah. If you read a lot of my poetry, she asked, when and why or how I started writing essays. A lot of my poetry is, or at least it's getting shorter as I get older. The last two books don't have any long poems in them, and I don't know why that is so. And I don't know what that means. If I'm going to, my poems are shrinking, maybe I am too. But I always, when I wrote the longer narrative poems, like the one I read you about, the bridge in Pittsburgh, they're Kaufman's, for me, the essay and the poem are fairly close together if you're sort of a narrative poet. And so it wasn't hard. There wasn't really a transition. Essays are longer, but as the gentleman, Mr. Wallace said, you know, I write a poetic prose, and I write a kind of narrative poetry, and so the two weren't mutually exclusive. Whereas if I was trying to write fiction, I think I would get into a hole. I don't think I could, you know, write fiction for a couple weeks and then poetry. But I don't have that much trouble moving from an essay to. But when I write essays, when you write an essay, you know, you're going to deal with 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 words. So you have to know where you're going, you know, you have to plot it out. And for me, it took a long time to write my book because I couldn't tell when the essay was done. That was a problem I had. Like, when is this essay finished? Because if it's nonfiction, you can always add some more, you know. Drawing these tickets made me think of one of my essays about not going to Vietnam during the Vietnam War. And I was saved because my draft number was 357. And if you know how it works, that meant there were only 8 numbers higher than mine. So, I mean, unless the war was, they were going to start fighting in Mars, I wasn't going. But then I started wondering about that. Was it just luck? And I read about the first 3 or 4 lotteries, and they were worse than this. No offense. You know, they put all the balls with the numbers in this big drum, and they were supposed to roll it over and shake it up, and they forgot. So they put in, you know, they put January, then February, then March. So October, November, and December were on the top of the barrel, and they didn't roll the barrel over enough. So when the guys started picking the winning lottery numbers, which you didn't want to win because you were going to go to Vietnam and get killed, October, November, and December came up more often than January, February, and March because it was the bottom of the barrel. And this was not malicious. This was just stupid. But look how a lot of people died because some joker forgot to roll the barrel over a lot. So, not sure what that was about. But I do have a poem about Vietnam, too. I guess the point is the things I write poems about and the things I write essays about overlap, whereas if I was trying to write a novel, that would be a world unto itself, and I don't think I could get out of it.
Anyone else? We'll take one more if you have it. Nobody? Okay.
Nobody? You don't want to talk about the Pirates and the Steelers? Thank you. Thanks a lot.